Mounts Bay, Cornwall, August 1625. Agnes Pender, 19 years old, wakes to her cottage door splintering inward. Two men drag her from her bed by the hair. Outside, the village of Mousehole burns. Orange against the night sky, she can hear her mother screaming somewhere. Behind her, she will never hear that voice again. Agnes is thrown into a longboat with 11 other women from her village. Their wrists are bound with rope so tight, her fingers go numb within minutes. The men speak a language she does not understand. One of them holds a curved blade to the throat of a girl who tries to stand. The girl is 14. She goes still. By dawn, Agnes is aboard a ship with over 60 Cornish captives. The youngest is 9, the oldest is 43. The men have been separated and chained. Below deck, the women are kept in a cramped hold that stinks of tar and human waste. When the English coast disappears over the horizon, one woman begins to pray aloud. A corsair silences her with the back of his hand. Agnes will spend the next 3 weeks on this ship. She will watch 4 women die from thirst and disease before they reach the African coast. She will be stripped, inspected, and sold in a market where buyers examine her teeth like livestock. She will be purchased by a merchant who speaks no English and taken to a house where she will remain for the next 22 years. She will bear children she is not permitted to keep. She will forget the sound of her own mother's voice. She will die at 41, never having seen England again. This is the story of what happened to 400 English women taken from Cornwall in the summer raids of 1625. And it is a story that England has tried very hard to forget. This is dark history. We find the stories buried beneath centuries of silence, stories of ordinary people who vanished into a system designed to erase them completely. Subscribe and leave a like if you believe these stories deserve to be told, because what the Barbary corsairs did to the women of Cornwall was not random violence. It was an industry, and it operated for over 300 years. The Barbary coast stretched from Morocco to Libya. Its ports operated as independent states ruled by corsair captains who owed nominal allegiance to the Ottoman Empire but answered to no one. Alliers alone housed over 25,000 Christian captives by 1620. Sailed Tunis and Tripoli held thousands more. These were not random pirates. They were a military-industrial complex built entirely on human trafficking, and their reach extended far beyond the Mediterranean. In 1595, a Barbary fleet appeared off the coast of Cornwall for the first time. The English had no warning. The corsairs landed at Penzance, burned the town, and took 80 captives in a single night. England was stunned. The raiders had sailed over 2000 m through hostile waters to reach a coastline that considered itself untouchable. It would not be the last time. Elizabeth Trenwith was 34 years old when the corsairs came to Lucy in 1625. She had 3 children under the age of 10. Her husband Thomas was a fisherman who happened to be at sea that morning. When he returned that evening, his cottage was ash. His wife and all 3 children were gone. He spent the next 11 years trying to ransom them. He mortgaged his boat, his house, and borrowed from every merchant in Cornwall. He raised 120. It was not Enough, Elizabeth was valued at 180. The children were sold separately before he could make contact. Thomas Trenwith died in 1636 without ever learning what happened to his family. The economics of Berber slavery were precise. A healthy young woman between 15 and 25 fetched between 100 and 200 at auction, that is, roughly £30,000 in modern currency. Skilled tradesmen might earn £8 per year. A ransom demanded triple the purchase price. The mathematics were designed to make rescue impossible for anyone except the wealthy. The corsairs who raided Cornwall in 1625 were not Moors or Turks. Their leader was a man named Murat Ree, born Janson in the Dutch city of Haarlem. He had been a legitimate privateer before his capture and conversion to Islam. Now he commanded a fleet operating out of Sale, Morocco, under his direction. Berber ships reached Iceland in 1627, taking over 400 captives from a single village. Cornwall was closer and softer. The fishing villages had no walls, no cannons, no militia. They were harvested like crops. Mary Walcott was 16 when Murat Race's men pulled her from her father's boat in Penzance harbor. She watched her father take a sword through the stomach when he tried to hold on to her arm. His body went into the water. Mary went into the hold. She would later describe the voyage in a letter smuggled to England through a Franciscan friar. The women were kept in darkness for 23 days. They were fed once daily. They were not permitted to speak. When one woman died on the 14th day, her body remained in the hold for 3 more days before the corsairs removed it. The English government knew the raids were coming. Merchants in the Mediterranean had reported increased Berber activity. Throughout 1624, the mayor of Penzance had written to London requesting coastal defences. His letter went unanswered. When the raids finally came, the response was silence. Parliament debated. The Navy claimed insufficient ships. Charles I was consumed by conflicts with France and Spain. The women of Cornwall were abandoned to their fate. Official English records claimed 60 taken in the 1,625 raids. Parish records tell different story. Mousehole alone lost 47 inhabitants in a single night. Penzance lost over 60. Louis, Fowey and smaller fishing hamlets along the coast added dozens more when later historians compiled the full accounting from church registers, probate records and family testimonies. The number exceeded 400. Over half were women and children. The discrepancy exists because England did not want to admit the scale of its failure. The journey from Cornwall to the Berber coast took between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on weather. Captives were kept below deck in holds designed for cargo. The space allotted per person was roughly 6 ft by 2 feet. There was no standing. There was no privacy. Waste accumulated where people lay. Fresh water was rationed to 1 cup per day. Bread was distributed every second morning. Many captives arrived at their destination already weakened by dysentery and dehydration. Agnes Pender watched the African coast appear through a gap in the deck. Planking on September 8, 1625. The ship anchored its sail Morocco. The women were brought up into sunlight. They had not seen in 22 days, their eyes burned, their legs could barely support them. They were hosed down with theatre and made to stand in a line while local merchants examined them. Agnes would later tell a ransom sailor that she did not feel human in that moment. She felt like a horse at market. The Baptist was the slave market of Alarus. Sale had its own version. Buyers walked between captives, inspecting teeth, examining hands for signs of labor, asking questions through translators. Women under 25 were separated immediately. They commanded the highest prices. Their destinations were typically domestic service or the household harems of wealthy merchants. The term used was concubine. The reality was a life of permanent sexual availability with no legal protections and no possibility of refusal. Catherine Trelawney was 21 when she entered the household of a textile merchant in Alliers. She had been a fisherman's daughter in Fowey. Now she was one of 4 women serving a man whose name she would never be permitted to speak aloud. Her duties began before dawn and ended after midnight. She cleaned, she cooked, she served. At night she was summoned. She bore 2 children in 4 years. Both were taken from her within weeks of birth. She was not permitted to nurse them. She was not permitted to name them. She was told they were being raised as Muslims and would never know her. The legal status of a slave in Barbar society was absolute property. A master could sell, gift, or dispose of his slaves at will. The children of female slaves automatically became the property of the master, not the mother. Conversion to Islam provided certain protections, but did not guarantee freedom. A converted slave who fled was still subject to recapture. A converted slave who refused her master was still subject to punishment. The system was airtight. Mary Walcott's letter to England described what happened to women who resisted. 1. Captive from the Cornwall raids, refused to enter her assigned household. She was beaten with rods until she complied. Another woman attempted escape in her second year. She was caught within a day. Her punishment was administered publicly. Her feet were beaten until the bones cracked. She never walked properly again. Mary wrote that after witnessing this, no other woman from the Cornwall group attempted escape. The lesson had been taught. The household hierarchy placed European slaves at the bottom. Above them were African slaves, then converted Muslims, then free servants, then family members. A Cornish woman in a Barbar household had no rank, no recourse, and no voice. If another servant accused her of theft, she was punished without investigation. If her master wished to sell her, she went. The average household slave was sold 3 to 4 times during her captivity. Each sale meant a new city, new language, new master, new rules. Elizabeth Trenwith spent her first 2 years in Sale. She was then sold to a buyer from Alliers. Her children had been separated from her on the auction block. Her 9-year-old son was purchased by a shipyard owner and put to work caulking holes. Her 7-year-old daughter was taken inland to a household Elizabeth would never locate. Her youngest, a boy of 5, was selected for conversion and military training. He would eventually serve as a Janissary soldier. He would forget his mother's face within 3 years. The Average survival rate for captives in their first year was approximately 70%. Disease, violence, and suicide claimed. The rest, dysentery, was endemic. Beatings for minor infractions were standard. Some women chose not to continue. The records from Franciscan friars who operated in Barbary as ransom negotiators describe finding captives who had stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped responding to their own names. The term used was consumed by despair. Agnes Pender was purchased by merchant named Hassan Ibn Asif. He owned a house in Sale with 11 rooms. Agnes slept on a mat in a storeroom with 2 other women. One was English, taken from a ship near Gibraltar. One was Spanish, from a raid on the Andalusian coast. They communicated in broken gestures. They were not permitted to speak their own languages when their master was present. Within a year, Agnes found herself dreaming in Arabic. The daily routine was 17 hours of labor. Women rose before dawn to prepare meals. They cleaned, they washed, they hauled water from the well. They served their master's meals in silence. They attended to his guests. When night came, they were available for whatever purpose the master chose. There was no concept of rest days. There was no concept of privacy. Even bathing was supervised to prevent escape attempts. The women were never truly alone. Think about what this meant. A woman from a fishing village in Cornwall who had grown up speaking English, attending church, knowing every family in her community, taken in the night, shipped across an ocean, sold to a stranger, made to serve in ways she could never have imagined. For year after year, how long could you have held on to your identity? Let me know in the comments. Catherine T.R. Ilani made a choice in her 3rd year of captivity. She converted to Islam. Conversion did not bring freedom, but it brought marginally better treatment. Converted slaves were less likely to be sold. They could own small amounts of property. They could marry, though only with their master's permission. Catherine calculated that survival was more important than faith. She would live another 34 years in Alias, never once attempting escape. The ransom system existed, but it was designed to fail. Master set the price. The price was always beyond the captive's known resources. Families in England received letters demanding 200, 300,000, 400 for relatives who had earned £8 a year. The Church of England collected ransom funds from parish donations between 1620 and 1640. The church raised approximately £6,000, enough to ransom 30 captives out of an estimated 20,000 being held. The mathematics told the truth. Almost no one was coming home. Mary Walcott's father had been killed in front of her. Her mother had died the previous winter. She had no family with resources to ransom her. Her letter to England was addressed to her uncle, a carpenter in Plymouth. She asked him to pray for her. She asked him to remember her. She did not ask for rescue. She knew the numbers. Her uncle kept the letter in a family Bible. It was discovered in 1873 when the Bible was donated to a Plymouth church. The children taken from Cornwall faced different kind of eraser. Boys under 12 were often selected for the Devshirm system. This was forced conversion, followed by military training. The boys were given new names. New clothes, new identities they were forbidden from. Speaking English, they were forbidden from discussing their origins. Within 5 years, most had forgotten their birth. Families entirely, some rose to positions of significant power in Barbary military hierarchies. They became the very raiders who would take future English captives, girls under 12.